And welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. As we want to talk about the major lunations like we do, the one that's coming up on Monday is a major lunation. It is a solar eclipse, which probably you already know because it's been talked about, the eclipse season of December. The lunar eclipse that began the month on November 30th, just as the month began. And then, of course, this one is Sagittarius new moon at 23 degrees of Sagittarius, and we've been dealing with 23 a lot as far as the new moon degrees. And that's, of course, very interesting because Eris has been at 23 degrees. In this case, a big old trine between the solar eclipse new moon, which is a powerful new moon, which is a new moon that lasts for 6 months as far as the influence instead of the 30 days, which is normal for the new moon. And it's also getting to be that time of the end of the year, when we look ahead and we say, well, what can we talk about coming up based on the charts of the new year? One chart, which I'm not planning to look at, would be the January 1 chart, the chart for the very beginning of 2021. I will be looking at the December 21st chart, which is more mystical as a beginning chart, because it is the solar transition, I should say, I guess, into Capricorn, which we call the Capricorn Solstice. And, it does indicate kind of this major cardinal shift, which happens, in the timing of the new year. It's kind of why the new year is the new year around January as it is, because that is an important mystical timing with the sun's entrance into one of the major cardinal signs, the winter cardinal sign in the northern hemisphere. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at the chart, the first chart that we want to look at, which is, of course, the chart for this solar eclipse new moon taking place on Monday. And I'm going to be a little ethnocentric today also. I do want to talk a little bit about events in this country, in America. I think, for one thing, everybody looks to what's happening in America and the election, all that election drama. And then also, it's just so fascinating, kind of the way things are shaping up, and I'll tell you why as we get further into it. But one thing we will want to focus on specifically, and one reason I have for bringing up the election controversy in this country is because there's a very important date in the whole election cycle coming up on Monday, the same day as the new moon eclipse, which happens in the morning, sometime during the day, in the morning or noon at Washington, D.C. There will be the Electoral College vote, and that should make more of a stake that is more firmly planted. We say a stake in the sand sometimes when we're planning something and we're not sure about it. That's certainly been the case with the protests on the part of the Republicans, that maybe something was wrong with the election, and there's been so much evidence to the contrary. This is, again, one of those things I just have to say in terms of science. And I have a couple things like that. I mean, one thing that was like that for me, in spite of trying not to be political, was taking children away from their parents and keeping them separately locked up. I thought was just not okay. Creating trauma in that child for the rest of their life. So that was something I was very clear about, even though there was a bit of a political angle to that was just something that should not have happened. Similarly, also, it gets to be political with this Republican-Democrat divide that we have in our country. The evidence for climate change, I think, is really incontrovertible. All the scientists, all the climate scientists, are very unified in saying that it's getting warmer. I mean, we've had record summer temperatures each year is a new record, the hottest ever, or the hottest in recorded time or something. And so I do believe that, and I do state that, and I'm sorry, I apologize to people that do not want to go that way, but I do feel that that's very clear. And it's interesting because it lines up with these new planets. The new planet, Eris, that I have been really clear about being a feminine warrior for soul intention, going deep with what you most sincerely believe and fighting for that. That's what it's about, and I see it over and over again with paradigm shifters, feminists. Anybody that has that strong in their chart is kind of, their inclination is to speak their truth, and it's a good thing to be able to speak your truth, as long as you can keep it polite, not make it an attack. So I do have also a third thing, which I can't help but acknowledge, which is that so many people have said that the election was fair and certifiable. All the states have certified their counts. The guy that was in charge of election security said that he believes that this is, and he was appointed by Trump, he believes that this is the most safe and secure election in U.S. history. And the results are incontrovertible. I mean, it's only a few tens of thousands of votes in particular states that have done the task of electing Joe Biden as the next president. But it's very clear. It's not a question mark. So then I wonder, and I think we all wonder, and I don't know how many people that are kind of believing the conspiracy stuff that there was fraud, but that does seem to be an untruth, a lie on the part of, and it's political. It's not a legal strategy because there's no legal strategy. Even the Supreme Court keeps turning down the case. No court. There's 55 lawsuits that have failed. There's no one case of any kind of even a taint of fraud that would be more than like a vote here or a vote there. So tens of thousands of votes in the swing states, in each of the swing states. Anyway, so you wonder, why is this still being pushed? And that's why I bring up Monday, because Monday is the Electoral College vote. Maybe that will be a time when the Republicans in Congress come around and say, well, we have to admit Biden won the election. I'm hoping, because it really is divisive that Trump keeps saying very straight out, as though he knows what he's talking about, that there was fraud. And it really is a political maneuver, and you wonder what he's after. And of course, one thing he's after is continued power with at least a portion of the electorate. So this is a very intense time, is what I'm leading up to for our country. And one thing I think it'll be important to bear in mind is the position of Pluto in the U.S. chart. So before we look at the chart of the solar eclipse, let me just bring up very quickly the natal chart of the United States, and we note that Pluto is at 27.5 degrees of Capricorn in this chart. And people have been talking about the fact that Pluto is getting very close to that. It is kind of the Pluto return is being hinted at. It would not be true that it's happened as far as an exact, because Pluto's at 23 right now. It's not quite at the 27.5 mark. That won't be until 2022. But I just want to mention that as a background. So let's take a look at this chart. As usual, we do have a lot of stress on the Saturn-Pluto, which has been the hallmark of the 2020 year. And it's getting so that Saturn is kind of escaping 29 degrees of Capricorn, 44 minutes, almost out of Capricorn, which will change things, I believe. And then Jupiter almost out. And of course, the big news is a week from this day, on the 21st, Saturn and Jupiter will be joining at the 0 degree mark of Aquarius. And that'll be a big deal because it'll be the Great Conjunction, so-called, which is when they come together every 20 years. And this time it'll be not only in an air sign, but in an air sign for the next 200 years. So this is the shift from Earth to air. All the conjunctions of Pluto, not Pluto, all the conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter in the past, except for one, of the past 200 years have been in Earth. So we're shifting from Earth to air. And it's really an interesting shift. I mean, you associate Earth with materialism, with the tremendous progress in the last 200 years with science and technology and materialistic attitudes, and thinking that money is very important and life here on Earth is very important. We want to make it as good a life as we can. We want to have the most toys when we die, right? But then the other question becomes, with air, more about interconnectedness. With Aquarius, we can think of humanistic ideals. In other words, not pie in the sky, which is more the Pisces era, but now we're getting into the Aquarius era, which we call it, from the timing of the 2,000-year cycle. Every 2,000 years it goes to another sign, basically, not exactly. So we do have the idea of Aquarius moving backwards through the signs. And Pisces was more about not this physical world, and not being here, but being somewhere else. Like when you die, things will be great. You go to heaven. Instead, Aquarius is more like focused on the humanistic ideals. We can have great kindness and connection with each other. And we can have great communication and interconnectivity as indicated by the prevalence of the internet. Certainly the internet in this day and age is so different from the past 200 years, isn't it? I mean, it's really come into its own. I mean, we have a lot of regulation to consider as well with the internet, but basically that we can talk to everybody can be in communication all the time, even anybody, and that we have influencers that are just young people that have come along and made a name for themselves and producing a certain ethos on the internet and a certain presence and pushing products. And there's some really articulate young people coming along that have a international stage because of the internet. So it's all very interesting, these things that are shifting now. And we do want to note that in this new moon, we still have the Saturn-Pluto both still in Capricorn, separated now by 6 degrees, so we're getting a little bit wider separation. And then we have the 23-degree mark of Eris as well. So Eris has been fundamental in kind of pumping this up. And I want to look back just a little bit at one of the summer new moons also in just a minute. But for this new moon, we will say that, still the generalized opposition between Eris and Haumea, this is another one of those new planets which has to do with Earth issues, so very important in the timing of the idea of environmental concerns becoming more to the forefront with this new administration. And then generally opposite still to Eris, and then making a square to the end, the Saturn end of this grouping, which is 28 and 29 degrees of Capricorn, which is a perfect square to the Haumea position, whereas still Eris is perfect square to the Pluto position. So we have, generally speaking, these are important. These new planets are slow moving, just like Pluto. In fact, Eris is almost twice as slow as Pluto, or more than twice as slow as Pluto. Whereas Haumea is more like, this is Maki, this is Haumea. Haumea is kind of like a pregnant woman, the way the glyph works that I've worked out. And Maki is more of a birdman, which was part of their culture, the Rapa Nui culture. This is the creation god of Rapa Nui, Maki. They're both named after indigenous gods and goddesses, which I think is the point, which is very interesting that that's coming into the pantheon, the cosmology of this modern society, with the pantheon of not just the Greco-Roman, but now including indigenous gods and goddesses, which Haumea being the creation goddess of the Wai culture and mother of Pele. So I think they do represent strong connection to nature. I've been able to prove that by looking at hundreds of charts. And I've got another book coming out that will describe that in a little bit more detail. There's an article in Mountain Astrology last April. So this is new stuff, but it's also very strong, powerful stuff. They're definitely slow moving like Pluto. They stay in place for a long time. They will be important in charts in the future as we get to know more and more about them. And it does make this T-square still in a kind of wider framework, with the Pluto-Saturn, which is kind of just fading away, in the sense that, I think we can look at one more chart here. Let's see. Yeah, this is the solstice chart. It's not the exact solstice chart. This isn't the chart for when Sun moves to exactly 0 degrees to move into Capricorn. It's beyond that. That happens at 2 in the morning on this day of December 21st. This is 3:30 in the afternoon. And the thing is, this is when we also have the perfect conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter at 0 degrees and a half, and exactly when we have also the quarter moon with the moon at 0 degrees of Aries and a half, and the sun at 0 degrees Capricorn and a half. So this is pretty powerful timing, and everything is lighting up this new move into Aquarius, and I think of it as kind of a new phase, right? So we still have Saturn only 7 degrees now away, a little bit less than, but still, this is kind of fading out. They're not in Capricorn anymore. I'm thinking of this as kind of a new phase. and maybe the chart for the new year, and maybe we're going to see something else happening where there is more of a progressive outlook, there is more of a focus on these environmental issues, and I've been bringing that up. So one thing that's interesting is in the, let's go back to, this is the eclipse chart. So in this eclipse chart, we do have the prominence of Maki-Maki, which is environmental activism, more of an activist stance, than the Haumea, which is more of relaxing into the arms of nature, being profound connection with nature, nature's spiritual path, a sort of natural charisma, an adherence to natural law that comes with these people that have strong Haumea. Well, the Maki-Maki, remember, is quite strong, being opposite Chiron, and now an almost perfect partile, it is partile quincunx with Uranus as well. So this is like surprising environmental activism coming up in this time frame, both this time frame and in the last cycle also. And one thing that I've noticed, I mean, I guess, you know, the question mark, and I invite everybody to join in on this research, you know, where is the environmental activism? Well, of course, just the fact that the Biden administration, just the fact that he has named the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, to be the environmental advocate in the National Security Council. So that is kind of a big move. You know, he's saying environmental issues are important and they are a national security issue for the United States, which I think is accurate. You know, we're going to have sea level rise, we're going to have environmental refugees, which is all important for also thinking about issues of security and issues of where the country is headed and how can we fend off some of the dire consequences, you know. So I do think that there's something in the air. And one of the things that I did notice after I said last time that we should be looking for environmental activism to come up, I did notice that in the results of the election, with Biden being the presumptive president-elect to come in on January 20th when the inauguration takes place, that the admission standards in California are stricter than the federal, and there's been a lawsuit trying to make California's standards lower, not so much of a fight against climate change, because the federal standard was to take precedence, and this was part of the Trump administration EPA, you know, which is sort of anti-environmental action, anti-climate change. And so the funny thing is that the automakers were kind of joining in that lawsuit because they thought it would be better for them not to have to, you know, make such reductions in the admissions, you know. So they wanted to go with the lower, the more easier admission standard. But, you know, the thing is they have to choose the one that's going to be the actual law, and they want to make cars that are going to be saleable in California. So the question becomes, is that got a leg to stand on, especially with the administration changing? And I think they've recognized, so the two major automobile companies in Detroit that were in support of the effort to reduce the standard to match the federal standard have dropped away from that fight. So they're not trying to fight the California standards anymore. So that, just the admission standards being stricter as per California's advance, you know, California's initiative on this, is an environmental factor, is a you could think of Maki-Maki as being an activist agenda, and that is something that's just come about recently in this past, I don't know if it's, I think it's just as around December, maybe just a little bit before, but it's part of this whole cycle that's happening, and I'm looking for more. I'm thinking there's probably going to be even more as we get close, you know, as the transition is happening, as Biden is getting more on top of the whole governmental structure and naming people that are going to be heading various departments. It is going to be a strong factor because, you know, that is the progressive agenda, to have what they call the Green New Deal, what Biden is calling Build Back Better, and it's not quite as strict a standard. They have a 10-year, Green New Deal has a 10-year limit because they feel like that's what's happening. You know, they say, the climate scientists say that that's what we have is 10 years to reverse this, or we're going to be cooking. So I think it's very interesting to see these shifts and to see it reflected in the astrology as well. And of course, the other thing that's happening right now is that Mars is getting closer and closer to Eris. It's gone through its retrograde cycle back to 15 degrees, and now it's direct. And in fact, a week from now, when this solstice takes place, there will be Mars at 23 degrees, just matching Eris. So this is a kind of a tense timing. A week after the Electoral College vote, a week, well, this with the solstice where we can say this, and with Christmas, where we can say this is kind of the year end that's coming along. It will be kind of possibly with anger, possibly with action, an intense time, a more intense time that we're going to see. It's not going to be a peaceful kickback Christmas, especially with COVID raging. COVID is raging. COVID is worse and worse. And now the Thanksgiving cycle is starting to hit. The greater number of caseloads, the greater number of deaths. We keep getting record numbers of deaths each day. So that's a tough thing, and it requires action. And the required action is along the lines what I always say of Eris, which is everybody's got to stand up for what they feel is a bottom line requirement that they can come up with, and that would be to protect our loved ones and everybody. By the way, PSA announcement, I don't appear before you with a mask on because I'm in a room by myself and I'm broadcasting, but I have this simple mask right here that I use as we're required to come into this building, and I'm very much a believer in the masking. I think just making that statement by putting on the mask is saying be careful, don't involve contact, assume that the people around you, one of them might have COVID and you don't want to spread it, so to other people when you get it, so forth and so on. I mean, I think it's clear. I think the science is really clear cut, so that's another place that I feel like there's a very clear-cut decision between different factions, what they're saying as far as what the facts are, as far as what the science is, as far as we do want to reduce the number of deaths and the hospital overload as we make it through these next few months before the vaccine that is coming actually creates the 70% that we need, because it has to get into people's arms, all right? It's not the vaccine that will save us from COVID, it's the vaccinations. So, and all of that is a logistical situation, which has to be prepared for with money to the states, because the states are going to be doing a lot of the work. They don't have any money. The economy is down. There has to be a stimulus package. There's going to be an approximately $1 trillion stimulus package presumably passed hopefully in these next couple of weeks, and then more to come, hopefully in the next Congress. So anyway, I don't want to go into too much politics. But I do want to say that there's possibly things are shifting towards an improvement and, trying to get the society pulled together in a better way. The other thing to think about, which is very important for the coming year, is that as Saturn and Pluto kind of, maybe we could say fades away, although, you could still think of it, they're still within a pretty small orb. Rick Tarnas uses a 15-degree orb, so that would be right through the year of 2021, I believe, when Saturn is still in the early part of, and of course Pluto gets further in too. So one thing I'd like to work with regarding that is to recognize, let's see, I'll mention that as, I'll bring the solstice chart. So I'll just mention that here we have Saturn in Aquarius, here we have Uranus in Taurus. So this is the next major thing to think about in terms of outer planet configurations, what Rick Tarnas calls world transits in his book Cosmos and Psyche, terrific book, must read. If you can get around to it, if you can get a hold of it, read that book. It's really very illuminating about not only historical cycles, but also how these astrology emblems work out, these archetypes. It gives you a lot of information about the outer planet archetypes from the evidence of the history of when they've come into contact with each other, including the squares and the oppositions, as well as the conjunctions. So Saturn being in early, now we want to look at how that progresses during the year. And by April, by February, there'll be less than 1 degree separating I put the chart up, but I think I'll save time by just saying that Saturn moves along. It gets further in, and they become conjunct in mid-February. They become in a perfect square with each other. Uranus is moving backwards. Saturn's moving forward. I think they come to like 4 degrees and they're together, or no, 7 degrees and they're together, something like that. So by February, this will be exact, the Saturn-Uranus square. Now, what does Saturn and Uranus in square kind of remind you of? It's conservative versus progressive ideas. So we have two different collisions there. One within the Democratic Party, there's the moderates, and there's the progressives, and they're going to be tussling over what gets done, how progressive the agenda. And then the other thing is the major division in the country between the conservative right-wing Republican attitude about things and what should be done and not done versus the idea of going forward in a new way. Climate change is important, and put that front and center on the agenda. Build back better, alternative energy, all kinds of other ways of looking at it. This is obviously a major collision. Even right now, you can see there's only like 7 degrees of separation between Saturn and Uranus right here in this square. As soon as it gets into Aquarius, it becomes more obvious, but it's even in the current situation. Rick Tarnas has a 10-degree orb, so he would say by the time Saturn got to, in this timing, I'm not sure exactly, but sometime in November, December, it got to that point. And sure enough, we've seen this huge division between the more conservative side of things and the more progressive, the Democrats. The Democrats coming in and being accused of socialism because they want to have more universal health care. And God, socialism, what's that about? But we have a thing called Social Security, which is a form of socialism. There's a limited socialism already in this country. It's not a terrible, terrible thing to want to take care of people, I don't think. And in the COVID, it's really clear because by taking care of everybody, that's how we keep the pandemic suppressed. You can't just take care of a few people and not take care of the rest of the people and expect COVID to go away. It doesn't work that way. It takes everybody. So I think with the Aquarius, we're getting to a little bit more of a generalized idea of everybody having a voice, everybody counting, all, including minorities, including people of color. That's one of the big, I think, issues in the future of this country is to be more diverse. What's wrong with diversity? I think it's great. The more people, the better. The more points of view, the better. Everybody getting along, hopefully. We can maybe see a vision of a better, more inclusive society that's beginning to emerge. And I think that's really significant. So as we look ahead, we do want to note that that will be a big factor. Mid-February, be exact. Over the summer next year in 2021, it's within 2 degrees. So, which people have been saying, pundits have been saying, we're going to be seeing these divisions between the left and right in this country lasting well into the following year. And that also brings up the idea of the Pluto return, because 27.5 degrees, we can look a little bit ahead. Let's see, do I have the chart prepared? Yes. Well, this is going back a little bit. So as we think about 27.5 degrees, here is October 28th, okay? Just happens to be. And one thing was we had Mercury along with Haumea. But look, here's Haumea, 27.5 degrees of Libra. So this was beginning as far as the huge dramatic shift of the Pluto return, which is, we know that that's happening. We know that Saturn is getting right on top of Pluto. We know that Haumea was at the exact square point way back, like all of November and December have been pretty crazy that way. And then we can go forward with this chart. And if we look at this is just before Pluto turns retrograde. So on April 27th, Pluto turns retrograde, another month. at 26:48. So just basically how close Pluto is getting to that Pluto return, less than a degree here. And here's Pluto less than a degree, and then also we have still Haumea, which is now retrograde. So this actual T-square actually picks up during the year next year as we go further. Using the time passage software, we can advance it a month at a time. And you can see that here, for example, Pluto at 26, Haumea at 26, Eris at 24. So this is the return of that T-square that was happening last year, and this time it's further into Capricorn, where it does hit the U.S. Capricorn. So basically, talking about next year, we have the Saturn Uranus square, but we also, and look, you can see that Saturn and Uranus in the summertime here next year, next summer 2021, we have a really good solid square, as you can see in these positionings here, between Saturn 1238 retrograding away from it, but look how close, and this is 13. So, you know, basically that Saturn-Uranus is going to be a big factor next year. The divide, you know, the division between people that want to go slow and people that want to go faster, people that want to look ahead, people that want to look back. So the right and the left, you know, is still quite a bit of divisiveness. And then to see also this Pluto at 26, 27 and a half. When I say this Pluto, I mean the fact that this T-square is absolutely aligning with the Pluto in the U.S. chart. So we're seeing the preliminaries to the Pluto return of the United States, which is, you know, I mean, it's like a Saturn return, isn't it, for an individual, you know, when you have that moment when you really tune into what's going on with you in terms of maturation, which is Saturn. You go out of the 20s, which is kind of like still kid stuff in a way, into the 30s, which is more like you're an adult, independently adult person. Well, in the same way, this country, after 250 years, is going through its Pluto return from the birth chart in 1776. And it does indicate it's kind of a big deal. It kind of is a big watershed for where this country is going and what the heck is going to be the future of it, you know, and is there a future of it? How much death of the old and literal death can we be taking here, because the death count from the COVID just keeps on increasing. So we are seeing, now we're looking at June 25th. We're looking at the return of the T-square between Eris and Haumea going into still Pluto, not just Pluto, not Saturn Pluto, but the Pluto position. So we are still seeing a lot of transformational energy in the society for this country, especially because of the Pluto position in the natal chart. So that's the look ahead that I was wanting to do. And here's our new moon chart that is coming right up. And I guess I guess that's the major outline of what I wanted to bring. The fact that it's Sagittarius is kind of nice. Sagittarius is a jolly sign. It's ruled by Jupiter. And we still have this great trine between the eclipse degree, and remember this is a very strong new moon, and the Eris degree. So this is really emphasizing and bringing forward that whole idea of the feminine warrior, namely a warrior for intention, for deep intention, for life purpose, for finding what you're supposed to be doing, getting in touch with that. I mean, what else do we have to do except get in touch with who we really are, how to be the most authentic version of ourselves that we can bring. And that's kind of what's on the table right now as the antidote to this kind of situation that we're all in, that we feel a little rudderless in the country, we feel like we've got to pull together in certain ways. What can we do to advance the agenda that we, each one of us, believe, whatever that might be, whatever agenda it is that you feel called to espouse, that you feel called to make a big deal about, do whatever you can do, be it in just articulating your point of view, very important, just talking about issues, talking about climate change, talking about what needs to happen, just being alert to what other people are thinking and feeling, and stating your own position, not in an oppositional way, but just this is where I stand. Maybe it's action. Maybe there's actions you can take, like political action, like with money, or with volunteerism, whatever you feel called to do. Maybe to build a better technology of some kind that you think will be helpful to people. It may be espousing certain self-help practices or spiritual practices that can bring people into better alignment with their own inner workings. There's so much that can be done, and we all have the capability of doing it. We all have the mandate within ourselves, I think, to do what we can do. And so just to try our best to show up and to be the people that we really want to be. We're the ones that we have been waiting for, right? So I think that's what I wanted to say. And I wonder, do we have any questions that have come up, Leslie, or do you have anything to say, any comment you want to make?
So we have some questions that have come in.
Okay.
The first one is from French, and I often see her name pop up in the viewer list here, so thanks for being with us again, French. Asking, I feel how powerful this time is. We are hearing a lot about the positive manifestations of this energy, but not a lot about where we can go wrong. I know it's always best to put our attention on what we want to attract, but I think it's also good to know the pitfalls. What are some that you see as potential ways we can veer off in the wrong use of this energy?
Well, I have been alluding to that to some extent, and you're right, you called me on that. I do try to take the optimistic viewpoint. I am a Sag, after all. My ruling planet is also Jupiter. But what I would like to say regarding that is something that I have already said, because when I was alluding to the Saturn Uranus square, the obvious trap there is to be caught in our differences and not in our agreements. I think various people have talked about it in various ways, that there's ways we can find. I love what Carolyn Casey has to say about this. She's a very good astrologer. She's considers herself a visionary activist astrologer. She's certainly forward-looking and liberal in her attitudes, but she always seeks out the most conservative people around and tries to find common ground with them, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So there I go being optimistic again, but what I'm basically saying is the danger, the trap, is that we can be so caught in our differences. I mean, to the extent that we're seeing it already. There's armed people supposedly with guns, making a big deal about, I think it's the Secretary of State in which swing state? I'm going to say maybe Michigan, where there's been a lot of that, because the Michigan governor was, there was a kidnap plot that was uncovered. They were going to kidnap the governor because she was being too officious and too, you got to stick to the rules and wear masks. That whole divide between people that listen to the epidemiologists and the scientists saying you have to wear masks, you have to do social distance, you can't congregate, you can't have a big Thanksgiving even though you'd like to, you can't have a party even though you'd like to, and then there's bars that are still trying to stay open and have parties anyway, and various people fighting against it because nobody likes restrictions. Well, fine, nobody likes restrictions, but how do we get the COVID pandemic under control, because it is out of control, raging out of control right now, and that, of course, is another difficult part. That when I say Pluto and I say Saturn Pluto, it's got that downside to it that it is difficult. It is a hopefully a learning experience, and hopefully it's a transformation which eventually results in a positive situation and positive improvement in the society. But Saturn Pluto is a difficult thing to go through. We've been going through it. What's wrong with what's happening in 2020? Well, the pandemic is a big problem, and we've been suffering through it. And we can say that there's a positive side to it, and I do. But we can also say that it's difficult, which it is. And it gets a little bit more difficult by the 21st with this conjunction that happens then between Mars and Eris. That can bring out anger, that can bring out violence. It's how you deal with your Mars. Do you rage? Do you blame others? Point the finger away from yourself? That's one approach, and it's not recommended. The recommended approach is when you feel that anger coming up, you stop and count to 10. That's what they always say, right? Stop and count to 10. Well, when you're counting to 10, you might stop and think, what is the real root of my anger? Is it just because this person has taken my parking space and I'm really mad about that because that's where I park? Or is it something that's come up from even as a child when we were neglected in some way and we didn't feel honored and respected and we felt left out and it was painful, and that's something we haven't been really looking at. There's all kinds of trauma from earlier experiences as kids, especially in the society that's not very thoughtful about how we deal with kids. But becoming aware of what's going on inside you is really the ticket, is really the key. And that's your own salvation. You can't always take care of the whole community. You can't always see things happening for the better unless you happen to be a visionary community leader that's got a lot of charisma and leadership, and maybe you're the mayor. Maybe then you can make a difference, a huge impact on your community. But even if you're making just a tiny impact on your community, you're making a difference. And even if you're only taking care of yourself and looking into how to be the best possible version of yourself that you can be, you're making a difference. So I tend to look at things and say, rather than feel helpless, oh my God, there's nothing we can do, the pandemic is raging, we're all going to die, nothing we can do, everybody's angry at each other, there's this war going on, culture wars, what can I do? But there is something you can do, because you can take a stand for what you believe, you can make individual effort in each case that you're in the midst of to be the best person you can be. It's easier said than done, but it's worth the fight. So I guess I would say yes, there's difficulties for sure, including, I think, the whole society. The fact that there's a lot of Pluto in this situation with America kind of matches the fact that there's also more death in America now than there's been. We had as many people die yesterday as died in 9/11. That's a tough thing to look at, because it keeps happening. It's not like it's going to change. So something has to get done. We have to all start pulling together rather than separately. So another question?
Yeah, sure. There is another question from Naya asking, what is the impact of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on a natal south node of 0 Aquarius?
Well, that's very good.
And I wonder if for the other viewers, maybe you could talk about
if it lands.
If they have a placement near 0 Aquarius, it might not be the south node, how to sort of interpret that and navigate that.
I think that's important, yeah. I'll mention also, because we're looking at an eclipse chart right here, if you have something at 23 degrees of a mutable sign, you are being hit by this eclipse, and it's significant. Any time there's an eclipse degree that interacts with your own natal chart, it's significant. Now the question becomes, what about the 0 degree mark of Aquarius not being an eclipse, and not even being the 0 degree mark of Capricorn, which is the solstice degree where the sun is at the solstice time, a week from Monday. But I guess I think it's still significant, because that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is important. Now, with the south node, it's maybe not as significant as some other things. On the north node, I would think it would be more significant for you. On the south node, what it is, it's reminding you of where you come from. So it's like saying to you, pay attention and see how your past is influencing your future. And that may be in a very good way, because you've had the experience in the background, including your DNA, including your ancestral background. It could be that it's holding you back in some way. If there's a way that, the south node is where you're coming from. So, and then you would want to look at the position within the chart, what house it's in, because that's an important house. In other words, this is where you're comfortable. If it's, let's say it's the 1st and the 7th, let's say your south node is in the 1st, your north node is in the 7th, you're coming from a sense of understanding yourself and feeling comfortable in your own skin, but your challenge is to try to partner with other people. Can you make that happen? And then similarly, if the south node is in the 7th and the north node is in the 1st, you're coming from an easy way of partnering with people, but how do you stand on your own 2 feet? How do you individually develop, and in spite of that? So maybe you were a twin, or maybe you came from a close family and you had a close sibling or two. How do you differentiate and come to your own sense of self-worth and everything else? So looking at the South and the North Node as a pair is very, very important. You want to look at both of those. And whatever else it might be. I think it's drawing your attention. It's more of a conscious attention, I believe, that's being drawn to the 0-degree Aquarius mark. So if that's in your chart or any of the fixed signs, Taurus, Scorpio, or as well Leo, it's important. So yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, that it is a significant time. And do we have another question that we want to bring forward now? Or?
Yeah, we have one more. We have it from Nina, and she is experiencing some challenges with her health and finances, but she has a Sagittarius moon. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about when you have placements in signs where the eclipses are happening, because the eclipses are on the Sagittarius-Gemini axis right now.
Well, I think that's interesting, and I think, of course, the other thing, to me, the way I work, that's quite interesting also, is what degree. In other words, if you have a 23-degree Sagittarius moon, yeah, wow, you're really being lit up in that way, and it's all about finding your inner child, finding your sense of nurturing, your sense of home environment, getting into that factor, really exploring the moon, exploring your natal moon. Now, that's true to a lesser extent, even if it's 2 degrees of Sagittarius, because of the Sagittarius qualities. I would say, what would you say, Leslie, about that as far as just the sign being lit up? Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think when we have personal planets, especially the sun or moon, on the axis of the eclipses, that we can experience a tremendous amount of change and perhaps events that bring our awareness into a new phase of our evolution, and that can be quite intense. It often is not something that happens gently. There may be some, especially with all of the other astrological considerations that are happening in this time, right, to be some intensity to be with, but ultimately they're pointing us to our awareness and our healing.
I think that's good. I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yep, I'm finished.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I think I cut in almost before you finished.
Nope, I was done.
Well, I just want to say
asking.
I do get that, and I think that stimulates in me the thought that when you are going through that intensity, there's a couple of ways to look at it. And of course, our tendency is sometimes to be, the victim and to say, oh my God, I'm going through such an intense time. And it may be it may be that your car was broken into and you lost a lot of important possessions. It may be that your health suffers and you have a health situation. And those are so challenging, but I think the best thing to do is to look at how you're rising to the occasion. How are you challenged? How is that loss of perhaps money making you think twice about what's important in life, the material or the non-material? Or if it's your health, and you're going through challenging health experiences like that person is that asked the question, I think it's good to look at that in a very general way and say, how am I rising to the occasion? How can I muster my energy? What am I maybe doing in a negative? Maybe there's a negative factor that is kind of in a chime with the health issue, that perhaps I can adjust my attitude. I can look at it in a more equanimous way. That's to me the ideal with some of these situations when you have a difficult transit, like a Pluto transit. And this is the ideal, but it's not practical. It's not. You can't actually magically transform yourself into this. But I always think of the Dalai Lama. Somebody says to him, the best thing in the world just happened. We had so many people supporting what you're saying, and it's great. And he just says, oh, that's great, ha ha ha. And then the next person comes in and says, oh, but I've got some really bad news. This has happened, terrible, terrible things. And the Dalai Lama grins at him and says, ha ha ha. It's like that's the equanimous attitude that is just so perfect, and the perfect human, and you can't expect to be that perfect human, but you can just remember to aspire in that direction, in spite of the intensity, in spite of what you're going through, in spite of how everything seems difficult. remember that there is a beneficial universe behind us or around us, surrounding us, and that we are essentially, sometimes people come to say to you, oh my God, I've just been fired, I just lost my job, it's the worst day of my life. And then you ask them about it 10 years later. And you say, do you remember that Monday morning in December when you came to me and you said it was the worst day of your life? What are you thinking now? Oh, I'm so glad that that happened and that I had to make a shift. And it was really the best thing that ever happened to me. So, there's different ways to look at things, and really we get trapped in our ways of looking at things. And we're not the only driver of the bus. We're not the only one figuring all this stuff out. We can take advantage of what's really the beneficence of the universe to be on our side, or the beneficence of God, you could say, to be on our side and to protect us. And really, when you have your attitude right and let's say you pray in traditional Christian or Buddhist or whatever, or Muslim idea, or in a non-traditional way, that you just have an attitude where you're trying your best to be affirmative, to have a positive outlook, to put it up on your wall, the affirmation that you think means something to you, and refer to it, and just try to keep your head up, your spirit up. And we're challenged right now with this COVID. I mean, it's really tough. But I think it's also been a good time for self-reflection, a good time for people to really stop and think about what they're up to and how they can maybe do things a little bit better. Maybe they can let go of some habits that were not helpful. Are they doing exactly the way they think they should be doing? Or are they falling away from that? And you can kind of pull your socks up. So I think it's a good time to do those kind of things, and especially this solstice time, this thoughtful time, this end of year time, as we enter into a new year challenge, when we are going to have these divisions between factions in this country and elsewhere, populist ideals versus maybe elitist ideals, or scientist versus non-scientist, anti-scientist. And we're going to have to heal those divisions. And we're going to have to try to move forward in spite of them. And it's going to be a tough slog, and the environmental situation is way out of control, just like COVID. And I think the same approach applies. Listen to the science, find out what's really happening, in spite of the fact that it's invisible in the atmosphere, what's happening in spite of the fact that it's invisible in the infectious situation with this virus. You have to kind of use your mind to supply the gap in what your senses tell you, which isn't always perfect, and you have your intuition, which tells you things that your senses don't tell you, and sometimes you have to pay attention to that too. And we just have to do our best to make it through. So I think I'm going to wind up now. Do you have anything else, Leslie? Or
I think that's a great place to stop, and I think it's also a good place to share with our viewers your upcoming workshop.
Thank you. That's a good point. So I am, speaking of this configuration here, the solstice, I am giving a workshop with my friend Katarina Vestblik from Norway, and we're doing it in English, of course, hosted on her website, and it'll be in the morning time frame on December 13th as far as the West Coast, and then different times during the day. So I guess, can you put the link to that in the comments section so that people can see it if they're interested in that? So I'm going to be talking about,
yes, I can.
With her, we're going to be talking about the sacred nature of this time and how to look at this solstice event in a way that's life-affirming, and look at the symbolism of it too, to some extent, to see how we're shifting from earth to air as far as the cycle, and explore that. And we'll have audience members, and we'll be doing charts from audience members in the second half of the workshop. So that'll be very, very fun. I'm looking forward to that. And I think it'll be very informative and terrific with new planets, talk about new planets as well. And then the other thing is the time passages software is very good for this stuff, and it's very good for exploring, because you can put the mouse on things and you can see, what is that conjunction like, Jupiter conjunct with Saturn. You can click and get something up. This is in a natal position, of course, because we're looking, this is a natal chart, but you get the idea, you can get a lot of information. Incidentally, one thing I wanted to mention is that Mercury is part of this eclipse. We didn't quite get to that. That Mercury is very close to the eclipse degree, so with a strong Mercury, you want to look at your own Mercury position in your natal chart. That's another thing to be paying attention to. So as you look at your chart, you can click on Mercury, or you could look at the aspects of Mercury and think about it. Click on an aspect and it shows how that has impact. So the software is going to be, we're going to do an end of year sale starting this weekend. I think it's starting on Saturday this weekend, so not at the moment as we speak, and anybody that's tuning in live, but by the time the weekend rolls around, we're going to have everything, I think it's going to be 30% off. Is that right, Leslie?
Yes, all of the desktop software and all reports will be 30% off.
Oh yeah, and you get reports too if you're interested in that. Summarize of all this information. So good. So yeah, let me transition back. And just to leave you with a little bit of a hopeful idea, that it's up to each one of us, and really your life is up to you. That's the good news. You might think you're at the mercy of these political storms and tides that shake everything up, but really your attitude toward it is what counts, and you do have complete control over that. So best of luck with everything, and happy solstice, and happy Christmas, and happy end of the year. And we'll be glad to see the end of 2020. But we're not going to see much difference, at least in the beginning, in 2021. So best of luck to everybody on all of this, and we'll talk to you soon. And thanks for listening. Bye.